All right, welcome everyone to this virtual class this afternoon. My name is Erin Wendt. I am one of the outreach coordinators here for the state of Nebraska's Floodplain Management Division. I am joined by my supervisor and the State National Flood Insurance Program Coordinator, Elijah Kaufman. He's going to assist me with this presentation today. And today we're going to be talking about substantial damage inspections. And there will be an interactive portion of the class, so hopefully we all find that goes well. So this is the agenda of our class today. So we'll start with an introduction to substantial damage, and then we'll go into specifically an introduction to the inspection process portion of substantial damage assessments. Then we'll move into the interactive inspection practice, so that interactive portion of the class. When we get there, feel free to come off mute or use the chat to throw your answers out when we're doing that interactive portion. After the inspection practice, we'll talk about the post-inspection process, and that's going to include a demonstration of the substantial damage estimator tool. And we'll round off the class talking about the various resources available to you as floodplain administrators learning about the substantial damage process. So that brings us to the first portion of the content of the class, which is talking about an introduction to substantial damage. So, as always, repairs or additions to structures in your floodplain are considered development, and any development in the floodplain must be permitted with a floodplain development permit. This is typically a pretty easy process to go through if the structure is already compliant with your local regulations. However, what happens when the structure that needs repairs or wants to improve is currently non-conforming or grandfathered? You know, it existed before you had floodplain maps or before you joined the program. This is where that substantial damage concept comes into play. So if a non-conforming structure is substantially improved or substantially damaged, they're very similar concepts, it is required to be brought into compliance with your local floodplain management regulations, your local floodplain ordinance. Therefore, when a disaster does occur, the local floodplain administrator and the local community must determine if these structures have incurred substantial damage before issuing those floodplain development permits to repair. This is that substantial damage assessment process. Now, in the state of Nebraska, this is the definition in our Nebraska Administrative Code, and substantial damage is damage of any origin sustained by an obstruction or a structure where the cost of restoring that structure to its pre-damaged condition is going to equal or exceed 50% of the market value of the structure before the damage occurred. So again, it's important to note that when it comes to substantial damage, it's damage of any origin, like the definition says. It can be a flood, fire, severe windstorm, hail, anything that damages the structure, and it's a pre-firm structure or it existed before you had these regulations, is going to need this substantial damage assessment before repair work. This is why it's super important to get your community members familiar with the concept before a disaster occurs, because we know that property owners are going to want to begin repairs as soon as possible. So if they know what they're supposed to do when a disaster occurs, it'll help ensure that they go through the proper channels before repair work. Now, why is this process necessary? There's a variety of reasons why this is a necessary process. The main one, the biggest one there is it is established in federal and state law. So it's listed in the Code of Federal Regulations and the Nebraska Administrative Code as a requirement for having a floodplain management program and being in the National Flood Insurance Program. But there's a variety of benefits that come with this process. You know, it will reduce the number of flood-prone structures in your community, which thereby reduces the risk of continued losses and improves your community's resiliency over time. So when a flood event does come through, you can recover much faster. The records that you maintain as the floodplain administrator, as the local community, the local government, it can help protect unsuspecting buyers of these flood-prone properties. We've seen in the past that sometimes people would rather sell their damaged home rather than repair it themselves. And that would put the burden of compliance on the new owners. So the documents and records that you have on these substantial damage assessments will ensure a transparent real estate transaction, so the new buyers know what they're getting into when they're purchasing this new structure or new home. A couple other reasons this is a necessary process comes into funding opportunities for compliance. So insured homeowners through the National Flood Insurance Program that experience substantial damage can receive up to $30,000 on top of their flood insurance claim. This is called increased cost of compliance. It's an automatic rider with an NFIP policy, and it's this additional money to help them bring their structure into compliance with local regulations. These structures that are substantially damaged are also eligible to qualify for hazard mitigation assistance grant funding to help them elevate or relocate to bring that structure into compliance. These substantially damaged structures are automatically considered to meet those benefit cost analysis requirements for HMA grants. So the documentation that you collect as the floodplain administrator, listing out and stating that these homes have been substantially damaged, help them qualify for this additional funding to reduce their flood risk. Now, this is a breakdown of the steps of the entire substantial damage assessment process. You know, it starts with your office review and fieldwork preparations. Then you go into what's called a curbside review. Step 3 is the actual inspections themselves. And we've broken that down a little further, where it's developing that inspection schedule, notifying authorities, providing training to any people who are helping you conduct these inspections, and then obviously conducting the inspections themselves. Step 4 would be processing that data that you collected. Step 5 is reviewing and issuing those substantial damage determinations. And then step 6 is the floodplain development permits. We're going to focus mostly on step 3 and touch a little bit on step 4 and 5 today. But if you want more information, we do have a whole bunch of resources on our website that go more in depth on the other steps of this process. So moving right into the inspection process. So substantial damage inspections are meant to collect accurate data as quickly as possible to complete that determination. Like I made note of earlier, people are going to want to repair as soon as possible. So this process is in place to ensure that it is streamlined, but it is still accurate. So again, you'll want to develop that schedule, pull together a team to assist with the inspections if needed, and that involves as performing what's called a pilot or example inspections, just to ensure consistency throughout the process. And then obviously the third part is conducting those inspections. When you're developing an inspection schedule, there are a variety of things you're going to want to consider when creating this. So you'll want to start in areas where debris has been cleared, allowing for you to conduct these inspections faster because you're able to get up close and inspect those structures. You'll also want to note areas that have a higher development density. In residential areas, these residential inspections, they can typically be completed at a rate of around 20 to 35 per day, depending on the walkability and the density of the area. And non-residential structures are around 3 to 15, just because they vary greatly in size and distance from one another. So you want to just keep those ratios in mind if you're ever creating an inspection schedule. You'll also want to make note of any areas with temporary or permanent access issues. So those temporary access issues are going to be debris removal and things like that. And permanent access issues are going to be areas such as private lots or subdivisions that are gated. If you are assigning teams or creating teams, you want to assign them to areas with similar damages, just because it'll also help streamline the process because they're looking at areas with similar levels of damages. And then, of course, you'll want to make note of where teams are going to regroup and at one time, so you can collect those inspection worksheets and get started on processing that data. When creating teams, you're going to want to consider people who already have experience with building inspections. So obviously your building inspectors, zoning officials, code enforcement officers, emergency management staff, those kinds of people are those you should consider when creating these teams. but you'll also have people who don't have experience in inspections that are going to want to help. In either case, you're going to want to be prepared to conduct pilot inspections, because even though those who have building inspection experience, they may not have done a substantial damage or floodplain management related inspection. So again, it would just ensure consistency throughout the inspection process. With these pilot inspections, you'll want to arrange for up to 3, depending on the total number of inspections that are going to have to occur. You'll want to vary the pilots as much as possible between residential and non-residential with various levels of damage, just to give that experience to the people helping you. And these pilot inspections are to help demonstrate what a consistent field procedure is for performing these substantial damage assessments. It'll be teaching those volunteers how to, what elements to capture in the photos, how to document damages, calculating damage percentages for the structural elements you'll be looking at. And it's also to explain how to clearly communicate with property owners, because these volunteers and these people helping you are going to be representing you and the community. So you want to make sure they're professional when speaking with these property owners. And it will potentially give them experience using the SD 3.0 tool if needed. It's a kind of a tricky tool, but these pilot inspections are there to give your volunteers experience and know what they're doing. All right, so that brings us to the next portion here. So we'll talk a little bit about the worksheets we'll be working through together, and then we'll get into the actual interactive portion of the class. So the worksheets, so there are the inspection worksheets. There are residential and non-residential versions that we've created to kind of help assist in this process. And these worksheets line up very closely with the information that's required for the substantial damage estimator tool. So it's built that way, and using these is typically pretty helpful for those conducting these inspections. Another piece of information that we've created to help assist in the assessment process is this percent damage estimation table. So it's created to help visualize damage in structures. And again, it's structured to follow the inspection worksheets pretty closely. These are, however, based on flooding damages. So if you're inspecting something other than flood damage, it may be a little trickier, but they may still be helpful. All right, it is time to inspect very shortly here. So what you'll need to kind of do this with us is the percent damage estimation tables and the residential inspection worksheet to follow along. Michelle should have sent those out to you. So that should be pretty helpful. And then we'll look at some photos together and go over the scenario here shortly. And if you need to pull up those photos, they are here in the presentation, and the presentation slides were sent out. So if you need to reference them while we're discussing the worksheet, feel free to do so. All right, so our scenario. So the scenario here is significant flooding is going to occur in your jurisdiction, which is going to lead to quite a few structures that are grandfathered or non-conforming to being damaged. The flooding event was caused by record rainfall in the area where a nearby river overspilled its banks. Now, the flooding is going to last for approximately 6 hours with depths of up to 4 feet. Now, it's important we keep that in mind when filling out these worksheets. All right, so here is the first set of pictures here to help us conduct the inspection. When conducting these inspections and looking at these pictures, you want to make note of the height of the water lines, the location of any of the utilities, the foundation status, things like that. It'll help you fill out the worksheet and whatnot. All right, so these are the first set of pictures. Here is the second set of photos. All right. So now we are moving into the full interactive portion of the class. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen for a moment and pull the residential inspection worksheet up. So this is the residential inspection worksheet. So I will just kind of explain the first little part here. So the first three columns we've got on the top here is just identifiable information for the community and the structure. Now, our example community, the address was in Kearney, so we'll have to put the information related to Kearney there. So their community ID for the National Flood Insurance Program is 310016. Now, if you don't know your community ID number, that will be listed on your flood insurance rate map panels or your firm panels, your floodplain maps, or you can reach out to us and we can help you locate that number. And then in the National Flood Insurance Program, the name is kind of backwards there. So you'll have the name of the community and then city or village of. The latitude and longitude are just some more identifiable information. I don't believe it's required necessarily, but you can include that if you would like. And then this next column here is obviously specific to the structure. And our example structure was 1205 East 1st Street South. So again, just identifiable information. And again, we're in Kearney and their zip code is 68847 and they're in Buffalo. Buffalo County. Sorry about that. And then here is where your inspector name is going to go. So if you have teams being deployed or people assisting you, you can look back on this worksheet and know who conducted this particular assessment. So for now, I'll just put my name and I was on team 1. For the assessment date and the date damaged, this just helps notate, the difference between how long it's been since the damage occurred and when the assessment happened. So for this particular example, we'll say we're assessing it today, which is the 15th, but the damage occurred yesterday. All right. The next portion here is the photos. So you'll want to have at least 2 photos, number them however you like, and then notate what direction you're facing. So for this particular example, we'll just say facing the north and the south. But again, you'll want to be more specific when you're actually doing this. All right. Interactive portion here. So this is the structure attributes. So looking back to the photos we were looking at, we'll fill out the attributes of the structure. And you'll want to notate the year the structure was built. For this particular example, we're going to pick 1945 simply because we'll know it's pretty firm for sure that way. So feel free to use the chat or come off of mute as we work through this next portion here. But the residence type, looking at those photos, was it a single family residence, a town or row house, or a manufactured home? All right, I see single family in the chat. So yep. For exterior, was it a 1-story or did it have 2 or more? Yep, 1 story. I know it might have been kind of difficult to see, but the foundation type, did we kind of get a good look at what the foundation kind of looked like? Back in slab on grade. All right, yep. So we'll do slab on grade for this example. Do we remember, like the superstructure, did we see stud framed? Was it brick, masonry? Yep. Thank you for those using the chat. I greatly appreciate it. Yes, it was stud framed. Again, are we remembering kind of what the roof materials looked like? Was it shingles, clay, a metal roof, or slate? Yep, I'm seeing shingles. And then the exterior finish. siding, brick, insulated finishing system. Yep. Yep, I'm seeing siding. And then was there an HVAC system or the heating and cooling? Did we see that outside the house at all? Yes, yes, we did quite see that one. And then the quality. So you're gonna have to use a little bit of your imagination when you're looking at damaged structures, but thinking about what the quality of the structure was pre-damaged. Was it low, good, budget, excellent, or average? Okay. Seeing a little mix of responses there, but it looks like most have said average, so we'll go with that.
And
And
this
then
is the importance of the pilot inspections, right? You can kind of
Yes.
work these things out, especially if you're finding an average one, because then you can work off either side of it. Obviously, every team, every person that's doing these inspections is going to have their own opinions on things, but if you do those first few together, you can kind of work these little things out and come up with a consistent process as you work through. Sorry, go ahead.
You're good. Moving right along, the cause of the damage. So if you remember from the scenario I gave, what caused the damage to that structure? Yes, flood. Do we remember how long the flood lasted? Yep, 6 hours. And then the flood depth. Do we remember how high those flood heights got? Yes. 4 feet. And since we determined that this could be a slab on grade structure, that first floor would be right down there too. So it would also be 4 feet. Likely. All right. The second page here, we're getting really close to doing the actual looking at the damage part, but the depreciation rating. So again, this is kind of going to look at what it was pre-damaged. Was it in very poor condition, required extensive repairs, some repairs? Was it average, above average, or excellent? It's kind of, what did we kind of think? Okay. I'm seeing most people are saying average conditions, so we'll go with that. But like Elijah said last time, these pilot inspections that you conduct with teams are going to help work out these little differences. Okay, so this moves us into the element percentages portion. So this is where you're going to put a percent damage for each structure, for each element of the structure. So we'll start with the foundation. So how damaged do we think that foundation was based on those pictures, the flood heights, and the flood duration? So if you have those percent damage estimation tables up, you can definitely reference that. And okay. Again, I'm seeing a lot of different answers in the chat there. I'm seeing a lot of 30 to 50. So should we do maybe 40 for this example? All right. And then the superstructure. So again, that's the stud framing and whatnot. How damaged do we think that is based on the flooding heights and length? Being 80, 50. Again, a variety of answers there. think at this point, 50 might be the one I'm seeing the most, so we'll go with that. What about the roof? Do we think the roof has gotten any damage from this flooding event? All right, yeah, so it's likely going to be 0 for the roof since it was a flood, but like I said before, these inspection worksheets can be used for any type of event. So if there's a high wind or hail, there would likely be roof covering damage in that instance. What about the exterior finish? So the siding, how damaged do we think it got from that flood? All right, again, I'm seeing a lot of 50%. All right, so all right, I'm seeing between 50 and 75. So should we do maybe 60 for this one? What about the
63.
63?
Yeah,
Sure.
there you go. You can pick exact numbers. So just because you're given that range in the worksheet doesn't mean you have to go to 50 or 75. You can go anywhere in between there, and it'll be probably a little easier to do if you're in person looking at it. But you don't have to stick to just those ranges.
Yes, thank you for making note of that. That brings us to doors and windows. So remember where that water line came up, it did kind of touch some of those lower windows, and the doors obviously were impacted. So how damaged do we think those doors and windows got? All right, again, kind of a range of answers here. What are we thinking, Elijah? What's a good number for that?
48.
48?
There you go.
All right. And some of these, when you're doing these inspections, it might take a little bit of some imagination, I guess, because you're going to have to think about the inside of the structure. Now, not all property owners are going to let you inspect the inside. Some of them will. But for your initial inspection, you're just going to want to estimate based on the exterior damage and exterior flood heights. You can estimate kind of how high the water got inside as well. So with that, how damaged do we think any cabinets or countertops got in the home? I'm seeing a range of 30 to 50. So why don't we do 47? I don't know. And then floor finish. So we're thinking about the flood heights and interiors. So how damaged do we think that floor got in the flooding? Yeah, probably 100%. You know, if we're thinking 4-foot flood heights, probably got all saturated. We don't know whether it's carpet or hardwood, but either way, it's probably pretty damaged. So I think for this one, going 100% is probably pretty good. And then plumbing, how damaged do we think that plumbing got in this flooding event? Okay. Quite the range there. So again, with those 4-foot flood heights and the damage to the cabinets, there's probably some plumbing at similar levels. So I'm seeing a lot of 25 to 50. So we can do 45 for this one, let's say. And then electrical, you know, the electrical components in the house with those 4-foot flood heights, how damaged do you think we got? 82, 85, seeing some pretty high numbers there. I think that's probably a good estimation, so we'll go with 85. All right, next is appliances. So any appliances that could have gotten impacted from that floodwaters, like the washer dryer or oven, those kinds of things. Do we think those got impacted? Again, do your best to estimate based on exterior flood heights. Seeing some high numbers there. So it looks like the most I'm seeing is 80. So we'll go with that. Similarly, with that interior finish, the other pieces of the interior, how much do you think got damaged there with those 4-foot flood heights? All right, I'm seeing. All right, some numbers between 50 and 80. So why don't we go with 66? And lastly, we've got that HVAC. So if you remember from the pictures we could clearly see that AC unit, and it likely had that water line covering it up, or covering part of it up. So how damaged do we think that HVAC system got from these flooding? I'm seeing a lot of 100%. I think that's a pretty good estimation there. All right, so that is all of the element percentages that you go through when doing this inspection process. There's also this portion down here to calculate the square footage of the structure based on perimeter measurements. You can often find square footage on county assessors pages, so I would recommend going to your county assessor page and finding that. So post-inspection process. So we've got a couple slides just introducing you to the post-inspection process, and then we'll go into talking about the substantial damage estimator tool. So post-inspection process. So if you've had teams, you'll want to gather the data from your teams to make sure they've submitted all their data so you can plug them into the estimator tool. But yeah, this is where you're going to gather that data and start calculating that damage percentage. We do have additional trainings on our trainings and workshops page specific to the SDE 3.0 tool, because we're not going to be able to go super in depth with it today. So if you want to learn more about the SDE 3.0 tool, I would recommend checking out one of our previously recorded classes there. But we're going to move into a live demo of the tool. We'll briefly go into about how to create a property entry, how to enter those inspection results, generate a report, close out the tool and whatnot, and then what you should do and what you should share with the property owner.
Anyway, for this half of the class, I'm going to open up the substantial damage estimator and actually show you what that looks like. We'll plug in the numbers and information that we gathered as part of the inspection, and I'm going to show you after you've done your inspections. So maybe you have 20 more of those that you've done. You've taken that worksheet with you, you filled it out, and now you're back in your office and you're ready to plug things in. Obviously, that inspection worksheet, it didn't have anything about calculating a percentage, right? So you don't actually, you've got your percent damages of every single individual element, but in terms of making an assessment on the structure damage itself with everything combined, you didn't do that as part of that inspection worksheet. What you do is you take that and upload it to this tool or a similar tool to actually get a full structure percentage. So there's a couple of slides that I'll show here, and then I'll jump to the SDE 3.0 tool. This is what it's going to look like. This is the home screen. And if you haven't done so yet, you would be starting by adding a new property to this database. As you can imagine, in a post-disaster situation, you don't want to be adding all of your properties to this database in that moment, especially if you have 200 or 1,000 buildings that are in the floodplain. If you are spending time after disaster building your database, that's a lot of time wasted. So we recommend building this database now, which you can do in the SDE 3.0 tool, and then you can do your assessments with that database you've created when you need to. Okay, so first of all, I was a good floodplain administrator here. I've already added my database. I've got 211 properties in my jurisdiction that are in the floodplain that I have pre-populated into this tool. And so I can skip this add new property function. It's already there. I've already added the property in here. Um, we have a template mass upload tool that I recommend you check out for this. Let me go to our desk reference here. If you look under, so this is our floodplain management digital desk reference, which Michelle has linked to earlier in the presentation in the chat. If you go under post-disaster information, and I believe, let me see, under other publications, you have this SDE 3.0 enterprise upload template. That's an Excel sheet. And those columns are pre-labeled to match up with what you would be entering into the substantial damage estimator address function. So you can fill out that Excel spreadsheet and then do a mass upload into the SDE 3.0 tool to get your database. We've done a class on that before. So there's an SDE 3.0 demo class that we did a while back. And if you watch that, it walks you through that process. So where we're going to start from here is I'm going to make a new residential assessment. And what's going to come up is my database. These are all of the addresses that I have pre-populated into my SDE 3.0 tool. So I've got to go find the one that we're working on, and that was 1205. So a nice thing that I can do is I can sort numerically. So if I click this up here, the top of the column, it sorts it numerically, and I found that 1205 East First Street address right there. Now, before I click use selected property, I'm going to click this checkbox here. This preloads using default values. What you can do is if you click this enter default data, you can enter things like your community name, your CID number, and the date that the inspection took place, so that every time you make a new entry, it's already uploading that information. You don't have to type it in every time. So click that preload button and use selected property. Give it a moment. It'll take a second to bring up the calculator. While it's doing that, a couple of points I wanted to make. As we were going through that inspection process, you probably realized, wow, this is a lot. There's quite a bit of technical information. How do I feel comfortable making this inspection on behalf of this property owner? This is a pretty big decision to make. Well, one thing I want to make sure you're aware of is that it's okay that you've not done this before. It's okay that you're not necessarily a professional inspector. That's okay. If you're using the guidance that's available to you and you're being consistent and reasonable and defensible and fair, those are the things that you're looking for. You make the best assessment that you can. And then at the end of the process, you should have some type of appeals process where people can submit maybe a contractor estimate or a professional appraisal of the structure to appeal your decision. So do the best you can with the information you have and your experience. It also helps if the team that you've built around you has maybe some inspectors on it. If you building inspectors, electrical inspectors, code inspectors, or utility superintendents, people that have done inspections before, maybe not damage inspections per se, but they know what to look for. So, okay, we've got this loaded up. So let's go ahead and we'll start typing things in. The first page is about the address. Now, again, I was a good floodplain administrator. I already uploaded all of this information. So this is already good to go. Now, before I do anything, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to click this save button. What does that do? So that brings up these push pins. And if it's a green push pin, that means it's optional information. If it's a yellow push pin, it's recommended. And then if it's red, which there'll be a few of them as we go forward, it's required. Otherwise, you won't get a percentage spit out at the end in that output summary. So make sure to pay attention to those push pins. It helps if you click save right away, because then it gives you the list. Okay, be as thorough as you need to be. But again, if it's not necessarily a red push pin, you don't necessarily need it, right? So we'll move on to the next page. Got a couple of red push pins here. But again, I'm going to fill out as much of this as I can. So you have your structure type, which is residential. It's a one-story structure. The residence type is a single family residence. We said it was slab on grade. The superstructure, I'm sorry, I clicked on the help button. The superstructure was the stud framed. Roof covering, we said shingles. Exterior finish, we said siding or stucco. HVAC system was heating and cooling, yes. We had 1945 as the year of construction, so somebody came back from World War II and built their house, I guess. Just a random date that we chose here. Quality, we said, was it average or budget, Aaron? Can you remind me? Average. Okay. Aaron was our inspector here. Assessment date, we said, was today. The damage occurred yesterday. Cause of damage was flood. Duration of flood, we said it was 6 hours and 4 feet of depth, which equated to 4 feet of depth above the lowest floor because it was slab on grade. You can enter the information about the flood insurance rate map panel, the date of that panel, if you have it available. Otherwise, I wouldn't worry too much about this. This is information that you can access later if you need to. Okay, I'm going to click save just because we've been working through this a little bit. Don't want to lose anything. Assessment was saved successfully. Okay, so now we're moving on to cost. And what this cost is this is the cost of the structure itself. The square footage, you can do this by calculating it. So if you match those shapes that were on that inspection worksheet with the measurements you took, you can do that. Just match the shape and then it'll have you type in the square footage and stories. Or you can do it manually. So if I click this enter total square footage manually, maybe I looked on the assessor's page and it said 1,000. So I'll just do that and click save. And then when I click save and close, it'll bring that in. Before it gives you a cost of the structure, you have to enter a base cost, which think of base cost as the total dollars or the average dollars per square foot to build a new structure. Typically in Nebraska, we put that around $150 per square foot, may have gone up recently. I recommend talking to some contractors around your area just to see what they might recommend. The geographic adjustment, it's a multiplier based on proximity to larger cities, land value, those kinds of things. I just recommend putting 1. Again, it's a multiplier. And the last thing you need on this page is where this red push pin is, which is depreciation percentage, which we, instead of typing in a percentage, you can use this drop down. And I think, did we say average or requires some average? Okay. And that gives me a replacement cost value of $150,000. So 1,000 square foot times 150 of the base cost. And then with the depreciation percentage brings me an actual cash value of 113,700. Now, we don't necessarily need to use that actual cash value as the basis for our determination. We can change what we're using at the end, but you do need to enter something here in order to get a percentage from the tool. So don't skip this page. Okay, element percentages. We said 40% for foundation, 50% for superstructure, 0% for roof. Exterior finish, we had 63%, not 630. Doors and windows, we had 48%. Cabinets and countertops, 47. Floor finish, we said 100. Plumbing, 45. Electrical, we said 85. Appliances, we said 80. Interior finish, we said 66. And HVAC, we said 100. I'll click save again before I go on to the next page. And our output summary is the last page that you'll get, and there's your percentage. It comes up with 77.8% damaged for this structure, 88,449 for your computed damages, and then the replacement cost at 150,000. So this would be a substantially damaged structure. Now, maybe they come back and they get a professional market appraisal that puts the home at $200,000. You can adjust this if you add that there. You can click this little checkbox to change it to a professional market appraisal, and that adjusts your percent damaged. However, we also recommend if they are doing any appeals, they also include a contractor estimate for damages. So maybe the contractor estimate brings it up to 95,000. Just throwing out numbers. I can then change the contractor estimate like that, and that'll adjust your percentages based on the appeals you get. So I'll go back to computed damages and actual cash value. What I can do from here is if I click print summary report, I can get a nice succinct one-page document that I can print and attach to my floodplain development permit application that they've submitted so that they can start doing repairs. Or if they haven't submitted a permit application, you can attach it to a blank permit, take this summary sheet, which gives them the percent that you came up with your signature and your name. You can send that to the property owner and mark on the permit that it is substantially damaged. And then they can do what they need to do to start repairs and bring it into compliance. The other thing you can do is print a detailed report. This detailed report is much longer. I believe it's about 5 pages. And this is something that you can keep internally for your notes, not necessarily something you need to share with the property owner, but it is something that you can keep for internal records. It's a much more detailed and longer report. And you would do the same thing for any of the structures that were inspected. One note to make about photos, it limits you to 3 megabytes, which nowadays is really painful because every photo I take on my phone is more than 3 megabytes. One thing you can do is you can take screenshots of those images. That'll bring down the file size quite a bit. Okay, documenting determinations. So once you've got the assessments done and you've made your determinations, your percent damages, then you're going to want to document this. So we recommend putting together an official letter that documents your determination, either substantially damaged or not substantially damaged. We have template letters on the desk reference that you can use to write those. And again, the reason that you need that is in order for them to qualify for the increased cost of compliance coverage of $30,000 with their flood insurance claim, they have to have documentation from the community that it was substantially damaged. This letter would work. And then again, include a blank floodplain development permit application so that they can fill that out before they begin repairs. Some other resources. I had the desk reference pulled up earlier. Under post-disaster information in that library is all of this. There are checklists for creating a plan, substantial damage assessment notices, which are little one-page things that you can stick on a door, letting them know that you did an inspection or need to do an inspection. We have example press releases if you need to talk to the press, inspection guides, those damage worksheets, and those letters are all available there. We have a quick guide if you just want a quick few page little flip book that you can work through for this process in the field. Mercy, who is also on our team, and I think she's on the call here, she developed a substantial damage story map, which is a nice interactive web page that you can scroll through this process. And then we have new floodplain development permit applications for structural development that address this very nicely. FEMA also has web resources as well. They have a substantial improvement, substantial damage desk reference that goes into a lot of detail about this process. There's an answers to questions about substantially improved, substantially damaged buildings, which is really nice if you're getting questions from property owners about this. It's a quick reference to their frequently asked questions. There's a substantial damage estimator user manual and field workbook, and then best practices as well. We have a ton of other resources on our website, including our interactive map, which is where you can view digitally floodplain boundaries. Our previously recorded trainings that are relevant to this class would be our Before and After Disaster Strikes, Substantial Damage 101, which is a 2-part class. the Substantial Damage Estimator 3.0 tool, which shows you how to create that database. So it walks you through how to make that Excel spreadsheet and then do that mass upload into the SDA 3.0 tool. We can also help you with that too. Just reach out to us if you need help making that database. Aaron's done it before, so it'll more than likely go to Aaron. And then pack, prepare, be aware, how to increase flood awareness in your community. We do have social media, so feel free to follow us there. And then I just wanted to provide our contact information. So I said you can reach out to us if you have any questions, and I should probably give you the information that you need to do that. So that's all of our contact information. Feel free to reach out to any of us.